So, the multi-million dollar Bitcoin. It may seem crazy to some, but then many thought that Bitcoin would never be over $1,000 back when it was $3 or $20 or even $100. The risk to reward potential for Bitcoin right now is insane. When you hear people saying these crazy numbers like $100,000 or $350,000, well, those guys are crazy. That's never going to happen. But chances are that I'm going to be here making a video in 3 or 5 years talking about how people never thought it would go this high. We will see a $1 million Bitcoin, which gives it a $20 trillion plus market cap. Multi-million dollar Bitcoin. Now we're getting into the wild side of things, guys. That might require things like massive inflation to happen, but this is the money of the internet that we're talking about. We are talking about unlocking the economic potential of billions of people who have been excluded from the financial system. So yeah, we got a lot to unpack in this video. And so much of the future of Bitcoin has to do with the current dysfunction of the global economy, which is kind of why Bitcoin was created in the first place. Bitcoin, it rose as a direct challenge to the global banking cartels. It was born out of the ashes of the 2008 global financial crisis. Bitcoin's ready for this, guys. The USA has $22 trillion in government debt, trillions in personal debt for things like cars and homes. Countries like Japan and China, of course, are dumping US bonds. Countries are moving away from the dollar. They are moving away from the US-dominated systems like SWIFT. Trade wars are putting additional pressure on the US economy, which is important, of course, because it is one of the biggest economies in the world. That trouble in the USA can have very quick contagion effects elsewhere. But the USA is far from alone here, guys. Japan has nearly $12 trillion in government debt, which equals 250% of the GDP. Many countries in the EU also have crazy debt, with the whole Eurozone being around $11 trillion in debt, which equals around 80% of GDP. So the EU is doing better in other places, but that's still a mess. These debt levels are insurmountable. This is the kind of debt that will cripple entire generations moving forward. The current global debt is around 250 trillion, and the current derivative exposure ranges anywhere from half a quadrillion to well over a quadrillion. For derivatives, that's crazy, guys. It's completely unsustainable, and it's getting worse year by year. And the whole crazy show is propped up by the fiat banking and money system. The banks are practicing fractional reserve lending, whereby they only have a small fraction of the funds which they owe out available at any given time. They basically rely on not everyone coming and asking for the money on the same day, because the banks simply do not have it. And of course, most people are so in debt that they have no money to withdraw anyway. Then we have the Orwellian sounding quantitative easing. Now, this is a fancy term basically for printing money. And monetary inflation is one of those quiet, slow devils. Governments print money for basically nothing, get the advantage of giving it to you before inflation has taken effect, and every time they print more money, they steal from you. Every time the government prints more money, they dilute your money just a little bit. And look, guys, the reality is that no fiat currency lasts. The dollar, the yen, the euro, they are all destined for the scrap bin of history. All fiat currency has a shelf life. All of our current variants, they are not exceptions. Just because they're normal to us doesn't mean they're going to be here forever. And one thing to consider too in this conversation is that a $10 million Bitcoin could also be a result of insane inflation of the dollar. Not that I really want to see a multi-million dollar Bitcoin because the dollar went to hell in a handbasket. I think Bitcoin has a much greater value, simply that more than being worth a high fiat valuation. because of the failure of fiat. I think Bitcoin could be a multi-million-dollar asset based on today's purchasing power. But here's an example of how inflation can go so crazy. The Argentine peso is currently around 425,000 pesos for one Bitcoin. Back in 2002, the peso was paid 1-to-1 for the dollar. And of course, today in dollars, a Bitcoin costs around $10,000. That is a fairly obvious gap and a big mess for the Argentine economy. Now, you may think that something like that could never happen in your country. It's only for countries like Argentina. But no fiat has standed the test of time. Add into all this craziness, general malfeasance of the gatekeepers of finance, the banks are a total mess. The banks have not stopped gambling on the global economy. They still believe that they are too big to fail. And when they lose, when they screw up on their reckless gambling, they're going to call a social bailout for themselves while using capitalism to steal your house, while using capitalism to make you lose your job. You cannot have a system where you have socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. It's totally broken. And it should be no surprise this is how the banks operate. Corruption and fraud are the business models of the big commercial banks. They have been caught so many times committing crimes it would be impossible for anyone to keep a complete count of how often these guys have gotten in trouble for breaking the law. Then there is this systemic incest risk between banks, of which Deutsche Bank, of course, is a great example. It has received millions of dollars in bailout money from governments, but it is so reckless, it is so irresponsible that it is still on the verge of collapse. And due to the closeness of all of the commercial banks, if Deutsche Bank goes down, then other banks are sure to follow because they have so much cross exposure. And Deutsche Bank is not alone in its illness. There are many sick banks around the world, any of which could cause a domino effect if it collapses. Deutsche is just the worst of the worst. And when the banks tank the global economy again, and they will, you will be expected to pick up the bill for them. And if you don't like that, well, tough. The government takes your tax money by force and gives it straight over to these crooks, just like they did with the bailout in 2008. Or in some cases, like in Cyprus, the banks just steal the money straight from your bank account. That moves me on to the political system. The global political system is in a state of massive upheaval at the moment. Most politicians are hopelessly corrupt or inept and are just totally bought by the banks and the corporations and do their bidding. That's a terrible political system. No, guys, this is not some doomsday video. I personally hate the idea of mass pain and suffering and recessions and all this stuff. But understand, this is not just, my random opinions. Many economists are calling for another big crash. Change is simply a constant in the global system. Fiat money collapses, debt bubbles burst, banks go under, recessions happen, political power poles shift. I like this saying, if you want things to stay the same, then things are going to have to change. Change is a constant, and change is here. Its name is Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is giving birth to a completely new economy. The cryptocurrency economy, while still in its infancy, is offering the promise of totally revolutionizing the way that everything works. But we are still very early on the technology adoption curve for crypto. But just imagine having the hindsight to understand the power of the internet. No one thought the internet would grow like it has. There were so many naysayers back in the day. Well, here we are facing a similar situation with cryptocurrencies. The power of Bitcoin and, I guess, the wider crypto economy to absolutely overturn everything that we have learned all of our lives about money, the power is massive. Thinking that you're too late to buy Bitcoin or to invest in crypto, it's like thinking that you're too late to start using the internet or something like that. It is still early days for crypto, guys, but it is incredibly hard to predict the future and to predict the future things that will be built out around this crypto economy. And where crypto is now in terms of innovation, it's not where crypto is going to be in 10 years. 10 years from now is going to be a very, very different picture. And we'll tell stories about the old days of crypto when you had to manually enter Bitcoin addresses and pay big fees to send coins from place A to point B. Scaling solutions like the Lightning Network will go hand in hand with new technology upgrades to the networks themselves to make a more scalable and a more globally adaptable crypto economy. And right now, the brand awareness for Bitcoin, it's massive. You have Tony Robbins and Kanye West and Katy Perry and Donald Trump and on and on and on and on and on. Literally everyone is talking about Bitcoin. Not always in a positive way, but it is being talked about at the highest levels to the lowest levels of human society. The world's biggest investors, they're mostly massive Bitcoin believers, people like Peter Thiel and Tim Draper, although you do have some like Warren Buffett who are haters, but there are loads more discreet millionaires who are buying Bitcoin. And then of course there are the users and the businesses and all the things happening in crypto today that it's bigger than any point in its history. And we're still very, very early on the adoption curve. Then of course we have to give some time in this conversation to the business side of crypto. Massive institutions are getting into Bitcoin. There's Fidelity and Bakkt and TD Ameritrade and Six Swiss and pension funds and hedge funds and endowment funds and the CME Group and NASDAQ and banks in Korea and big banks in Japan. Financial institutions the world over are getting into crypto in one way or another. Ernst & Young, they're building stuff on top of Ethereum. Deloitte, they're invested into VeChain. Microsoft is building on Bitcoin. Samsung's putting Ethereum wallets into their phones. Opera browser has integrated crypto wallets into the browser natively. Japan Railways, the biggest railway company in Japan, is accepting Bitcoin. Norwegian Air, Baltic Air, they both take Bitcoin. AT&T in America, they take Bitcoin. WikiLeaks takes Bitcoin. Hands off Assange. The list of merchants accepting crypto and the companies that are using or holding or building on blockchain is growing by the day at an exponential rate. Many of those companies have announced in the last 18 months. Food for thought. This is just getting started. Then of course we have to include as well the billions of people who are unbanked or underbanked and who are going to be brought into this new financial system. The legacy financial system, it has failed billions of people. It has kept them out. We cannot have a global financial order that discriminates or does not give equal access to money. Bitcoin is in total opposition to all this. It is accessible to literally anyone, anywhere, at any time. There is a new system being built, a system based on crypto, a system that will allow trillions upon trillions of dollars of new economic value to flow and to be created across the underserved regions of the world and will unlock the economic potential of billions of disenfranchised humans. And that is insanely exciting, guys. Now, price-wise, to put it all in a bit more perspective for you, there's currently around $21 trillion held in offshore bank accounts by the wealthy. There's around $9 trillion in physical notes and coins. Gold is around $7.5 trillion. And the total broad money supply is over 90 trillion, with only around 10% of that course being in physical notes and coins. The other 80 trillion, that's all digital. Now, why do I mention these numbers? Well, first, gold is kind of the big target for many Bitcoin investors at the moment. If Bitcoin passes gold or gets on parity with gold, then it will be $350,000 a unit. For a lot of reasons, Bitcoin is increasingly attractive and chosen as an investment, especially by younger generations. And actually, we can also look at replacing physical money around the world at approximately the same valuation of $350,000, maybe $400,000 for a Bitcoin. But passing the market cap of gold should actually be easy enough in the coming years, as insane as that sounds. Just the other day, a whale moved $500 million in Bitcoin for just a couple of $100. Moving a similar value of gold would have been much, much trickier. For starters, it weighs 11,000 kilos. And of course, it requires some kind of a private jet and customs fees and security guards and all kinds of middlemen and a whole bunch of other stuff. Not easy. Even moving a similar amount of fiat would have cost anywhere from tens of thousands up to $1 million in fees, just the fees alone, plus the middlemen and the KYC and all that fun stuff. While gold remains a trusted store of value, Bitcoin has a lot of advantages for the internet age. And outside of our group psychosis, I guess, that pieces of paper have value, then fiat is not really much in terms of competition either. So then we start talking about offshore bank accounts. Well, these have long been the haven for the money of the ultra rich. Governments are increasingly cracking down on offshore bank accounts. Banks are only open during business hours anyways, and of course, even with an offshore bank account, you're not really in control of your funds. The bank is. Bitcoin is the ultimate Swiss bank account. Remember, all we know about that whale splashing around with his or her $500 million in Bitcoin is that they moved money from one pseudo-anonymous address to another pseudo-anonymous address. That's it. Who this person is remains a mystery to everyone. Replacing Swiss bank accounts gives us the $1 million Bitcoin. But can we go farther? Let's start to examine the potential for Bitcoin to redefine money, to be the native currency of the internet. The broad money supply of $90 trillion, $80 trillion of which is digital, it is ready to be disrupted for a wide variety of reasons. Bitcoin could be the biggest asset class in the world in the coming years, more valuable than any fiat currency because it will absorb value from all countries everywhere. It will be way bigger than any fiat currency has ever been before. This is the evolution of money we're talking about right here. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies more broadly stand poised to unlock billions of people from the shackles of the legacy finance system. And it can be the cornerstone of the future of the internet. And Bitcoin is truly the money of the internet. It's peer-to-peer, it's leaderless, it's censorship resistant, permissionless. I mean, it's literally accessible to anyone, anywhere, at any time, regardless of race, religion, nationality, political views, or anything else. Bitcoin is unstoppable. It's uninflatable with only a 21 million maximum cap. Bitcoin is like the largest peaceful protest against the system in history, and it will be the money of the future generations, the money of the computer-savvy generations, of the generations that have grown up with the world accessible at the tip of their fingers. People who understand more and more just how screwed up the old system is. How do you accurately put a value on that power? This digital currency age represents possibly the biggest power shift in human history from state power to people power. And at the center of all of this is Bitcoin. Anyway, guys, you will let me know what you think about my thesis on the multi-million-dollar Bitcoin. Do you think it's possible, or is it just crazy talk? Let me know about it down below in the comment section. And of course, if you did enjoy today's video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button to appease the algorithm gods. And if you are new around here, please subscribe to the channel and click on that bell to know when I put out a new video. Long live the blockchain, and peace out till next time.